Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining our first virtual event, The Show Must Go On, Costume Design and Production in the Time of COVID-19. I'm Abra Pilar Flores, President of the Western Region of Costume Society of America. I would like to thank all of our presenters today, Colleen Scott, CSA Western Region's Programs Co-Chair, Susan Sue, distinguished costume designer and professor, along with infection preventionist. Sorry, I've practiced that 8 times today. Teresa Chow. The funds are raised from this event will go to funding this year's Jack Hanford Scholarship. First, some housekeeping. Please turn off your video, making your box not visible, by clicking the 3 dots in the top right of your window and choosing Hide Self View. Please make sure you're on mute. We will mute too during the presentations. President-elect Sarah Andrews Collier will be monitoring the chat for technical difficulties. So please send her a note if you're having sound difficulties and need descriptive notes sent to you. We do not have captions as an option right now, but as this event is being recorded, it will soon be posted on CSA's YouTube page with subtitles. We have 2 presentations with time for questions after each. So please place your questions in the chat. As we anticipate a large group today, over 100 of you, Secretary Kate Wilson will be monitoring questions in the chat and bringing them to the presenters to keep things streamlined and to answer as many as possible. Whew, these are difficult times, and we are all learning how to navigate this new world. So we, our families, our friends, and co-workers can stay healthy. So many of us are not working right now, and yet it's the arts that we turn to when we need comfort in trying times. We will be going back to work, and I am confident that today's presentation will help prepare you to go back into the classroom or the workrooms safely when it is time to do so. Colleen Scott is presenting her production experience completing an opera as COVID-19 closed the schools and colleges, and thoughts on how that has affected her design process and Ventura College's production schedule this year. Colleen Scott is a costume designer and an educator with an MFA in costume design from Boston University, where she received the Cannes Award upon graduation. She has worked for over 20 years in theater, opera, film, and television. Colleen has written 2 books on the subject of burlesque, The Pasty Project and The Costumes of Burlesque. I am lucky to call her a colleague, as she is currently the resident designer at Ventura College in California, where I also teach. Colleen's work on today's topic, the production of Labyrinth, shows the power of collaboration, problem solving in extraordinarily difficult times, and the joy of creativity. With that, I present to you Miss Colleen Scott.
Thank you very much. It will just take me a minute to share my slideshow. Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here today. I really am excited to see so much participation, and we're very happy to present this important information to you all. Okay. Thank you for your patience with these technical things that we're just getting used to. Okay, we'll begin. Abra gave you a background on my experience, and I've been a costume designer for about 20 years, and I've been at Ventura College just 1 year, so this was quite a finale to my first year there. This presentation really began as an article for the CSA Western Region newsletter, but when Judy, our editor, read the article, she proposed that this should be an event. And recently, USITT, the costume technology group, had a forum, and I learned about Susan's document there. So the two things together kind of felt relevant and timely for anybody working in costume related fields. So I'll be talking a little about my production process first. So we're going to start with just the preview of the opera that we produced. Brent Wilson was the director turned filmmaker and film editor because of this production, and he created an actual film-like preview. So this is a good place to start, just so you can get an idea of what we made. And that will take a second. I just want to make it big enough for you. Okay, so if that didn't work, Katie, you have the link to the preview, so that we'll put that in the chat and you'll be able to view it at a later time. There's also a link to the full production, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. So what happened with our production? A similar thing that happened in a lot of places in our country. We were 1 week away from tech when COVID shut down Ventura College. So in the following 2 weeks, as all the professors scrambled to bring their curriculum online using tools available, our production team took a breath and scheduled a meeting about the future of our current production. This was a US premiere of Giancarlo Menotti's 1964 made-for-TV opera, Labyrinth. So Brent Wilson, the director, posed the question, can we pivot and still make this happen? And I was ready to try to do that. Brent surveyed all the students who were partaking, and almost all of them were able to commit still to completing the production, despite several of the students who were suddenly working full-time at grocery stores as essential workers. So just a little bit about my role and kind of what it took. As the costume designer, I was really fortunate enough to be pretty far along in this design process. So with only 1 week left until tech, we had almost all of our builds still to do, but all of the shopping and some of the fitting, all the fabric buying, everything had been completed. So we weren't really catastrophically hindered by the complete shutdown of society that happened those first few weeks of the pandemic. And Brent knew that the only way to achieve the final product was if he planned to do all the film editing on his own, because there were so many moving parts for the opera that had to be collected and completed quite quickly, and ideally by the end of the school year, which was just about 8 weeks away. Once we decided that we finally could make it happen, the real work began. So Brent had to reset staging. He did that via Zoom. He had to record himself conducting the whole opera, and our pianist, Mark, recorded the entire score to Brent's conduction video. And then it was the combination of those two things that each actor used separately to film their singing parts once they were staged in various locations in their homes. And then after the filming was the editing process, and that was completely on Brent. So he used Final Cut Pro for this. He took advantage of a free month membership to put all the vocals and videos. He created animations and put them together. And this was a 45-minute finished opera. So right as he was finishing, we took it a step further, and then we made a 9-minute process video that we added to the production. And that was just using interviews with the cast and crew just to give the audience a better idea of what it took at the time to complete the opera. Okay, back to this slide. So we're talking about the costume design portion of this. Basically, aside from taking on the rest of the costume build myself, the organization to distribute and fit and consult in the staging rehearsals, it took some innovative planning. So once the pandemic shut us down, I continued right away to build costumes from home, sort of in anticipation that the show would happen in one form or another, because the only way it would is if the pieces were complete to use. Plus it made me relevant, right? And I could say that I definitely still had a lot of work to do, even in the middle of this shutdown. So I would say the process took 4 or 5 times as long without my student crew, without my provisional workers to help complete the sewing. But we managed to coordinate a couple of no contact drop-offs with 1 student helper and 1 provisional worker to help with wig styling, alterations, and some millinery. So for time reference, our production was to go up the 3rd week of March. And now our costume completion date was the 1st of May. And that was to get pieces to actors in time so that they could film themselves, and then there would be time to edit. After the build came the organization and distribution of all the costume pieces and parts. And we'll see if this works. This is just to give you a little show of the renderings for this show. If the video works, great.
It does.
Okay, it's embedded, so it's a little bit more functional. You can get an idea of this kind of psychedelic, otherworldly show. It takes place in about 10 different environments, and some are quite surreal. Okay, so again, with the costume process, I had to start thinking about how the actors would get their pieces and how we would treat them and quarantine them after they were used. We were using whatever CDC guidelines were available as far as understanding how the virus stayed on surfaces and how long things had to be sequestered in order for them to be safe. So we did our remaining fittings via Zoom. And at the same time, I had costume, hair, and makeup consultations with each actor. To deliver the costumes, each actor's costumes were packed up. I had a gloves and mask on the whole time. And they were packed each in individual washable garment bags with their dressing lists. And then Brent and I shared the duty of delivering 18 bags to different locations all over Ventura County. So right after they were dropped off, we did fittings as final staging was completed, and then all of the filming happened in about a week and a half. And the actors were asked to pack up their costumes as they were given them, and then find a spot in the back of a closet to store them for 2 full weeks before they were picked up. And we did no contact pickups and drop-offs, but it kind of found us waving to each other through masks and gloves and screen doors and leaving care packages on front porches. But it was really a welcome sight at that point after the weeks of quarantine. This is a picture of one of the fittings. Obviously, the actor demonstrating his crazy costume. All right, so the fittings, I said that already, but here's a slide, just a slide that is one of the more intricate scenes of the show that does make use of these wigs and more intricate makeup. And you can see how many actors are involved just in that one scene and how it ended up looking for screen. So the result was that the opera production streamed. We completed it, and it streamed on June 15th, 2020 on YouTube Premiere. It was a one-time live viewing. The cast and audience members had a shared link. I've just found out that the full production is accessible with the link, and Katie can add that to the chat so that you can access the production if you would like to see the whole of it. The rights to keep the recording public were cost prohibitive, and we're finding similar issues in looking for production options this fall. But it's allowing us to think a little bit outside the box and delve into some new pieces that maybe aren't as cost prohibitive. Just a couple more images. This is a ball scene and a quick demo of what we did with couples needing to dance in video, and just another kind of dramatic image from this very surreal opera. So I wanted to comment a little bit on some future applications of this process, some things that we learned that could be helpful for other theater professionals and other educators. I think that this is still possible. We can still make art, and we can remain safe maybe even reduce some of our waste and be open to experimentation with new work. So we'll start there, because if there ever was a time to experiment with materials, this is it. And our costume design process is still using the same design tools, but our problem solving has obviously changed. So like I said, we're thinking about newer productions because of rights costs, but we're also thinking about productions that were made for TV, projection heavy pieces, abstract works, and even monologues and short scene productions, just because it makes it easier for individual recording and staging. So again, think about the streaming rights costs and possibly additional need for other tech like video tech, sound mixing, that might be exorbitant, but it also allows you maybe to cross over into other departments that have skills that you might need for this new format if you try to do it. We've been entertaining, even if we try something in person, we've thought about, do we need FM radio tuners to try to do a drive-in style audience? Maybe we need different microphones for sanitizing and better speakers, maybe if we're doing an outdoor production that's completely in the open air. So the costume design aspect of that is thinking about masks as part of the costume, engineering different types of masks for different activities. In case you haven't heard, the first equity approved production is going on right now in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. The New York Times just did an article on that. And Katie, you have the link, if you could put that also in the chat. In case you haven't read it, it did completely inform the aesthetic of the production, all of the safety measures that were required for COVID. And it's fascinating. And so far it's been successful with audience. So the near future of Broadway is sort of hinging on the success of this production in the Berkshires. I'd like to make a note about equity and things that have come up, not just in theater and producing theater, but in academia, especially with everyone having to be online. So when it comes to the educational environment, one of the biggest problems we've encountered with distance learning altogether is the student access to strong internet and to technology that helps them in their learning. So it needs to be prepared for and thought about that has to be provided for all students, all actors, all participants in a production, and any special equipment, not just the usual costumes, props, and things like that, but any other special equipment needs to be provided, just as these things would be provided in a union production for quality. In addition, in education, they're required for equity purposes. Sourcing. So I think it's a good time to think about waste. I was taking note of the number of boxes, and I have been even in this past year, but taking note of the boxes and shipped items, the packaging, and all that waste involved. And with the budgets probably being a little lower this year, I think it's a great time to go back to my roots and get creative with the stock that we have, and the remnant fabrics that we have, and go from there. Another consideration is delays in shipping and suppliers either still not being open. I know a lot of people have already encountered that. I'm in the back of my mind thinking about trying a fully zero waste show, and that this is the time that I think that that's very doable. We will be doing fittings. We'll be raiding closets of our actors to save money, which is maybe less doable in an equity situation, but are there exceptions for COVID-19 now in that situation? Additionally, in many places, especially here still in California, you can go into some stores, but you can't go thrift shopping, that kind of thing. Our resources are limited. So the basic gist is, what can we make with what we have? this is the last real thing that we're tackling in the fall that kind of got thrown by the wayside a little bit when we scrambled to finish this particular production. So we lost a lot of our student involvement from the tech side of things. And we're hoping with a full production process now, a lot of schools now will have a full production process time that we can employ a crew, a student crew with different jobs. We can plan for this better. Again, interdepartmental involvement may be an opportunity now. When it comes to making costume, we're really focused. We weren't as focused before on creating a project within the class that students can make something that will end up on stage. And now, after reading Susan's paper, I'm also thinking about building a working set of garments, gowns for fittings and masks that the students can make to be part of our set of safety garments for our costume workers when we do return. Fittings and safety are the two major things that Susan will be talking about, Susan and Teresa, excuse me, will be talking about in their presentation. But overall, the safety of our actors, the safety of our fellow costume team is the most important if we are back together in person. So it's one thing to be a one-person team and be working in separate buildings in the safety of our homes, but when we come together, and we will come back together for this work, and some already are, there really has to be protocol in place so that we can already have the necessary supplies and communicate our needs to our employers and those we'll be working with. So this is the bulk of what Susan and Teresa will address in their session. And now, if you have any other questions that don't get answered, we have some time for questions. You can email me, it's here on this slide. I thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I hope that you found at least one part of it helpful or inspiring for your own future work. Thank you.
Katie, do you have some questions from the chat that you would like to ask, that people would like to ask Colleen?
Yeah, one was, how exactly did you do the fittings? And then another question is, are you limited as to number of people in the shop and face-to-face encounters in classes?
Yeah, okay. Fittings, I'll address fittings first. We had done a few fittings in person in the regular style before the shutdown, so that had been done. But the fittings I organized over Zoom really was the actor trying on each costume in order, giving them tips on how to make it look the best from their end. They were sent with safety pins. They were sent with things that could adjust the costumes themselves. Nothing was picked up again to be altered after I had given the costumes to the actors. So everything had to be adjusted from their end in this case. The thing that is really positive about doing film is that you can really think about what actually is getting seen. We're not getting as much a 360 view of the actor for a lot of this stuff, so you can get away with a little bit more ugly alterations if you need to make something fit perfectly. Maybe you don't need full length. Most of the time we did not for this show. So there were ways to get around that. Most of those fittings were really consultations about how to make the actor look the best for each character. And we did the best we could with that. So the other thing was limited staff. I am a department of one and Abra part-time. So Abra always helps out, but usually the costume design and production falls on me, and then, well, that's my job. And then sometimes we get one provisional employee and a limited number of hours, and sometimes we have 2 to 3 student workers. Right now, we have no student workers, no provisional budget. So for the fall, it will be, they're working on getting me 1 student who will help from home, not in the shop. So it's a solo gig pretty much right now, and some drop-offs, which do help. So we haven't had to make or deliver our plan to the school yet, but I do plan on handing Susan's paper over at some point to start establishing what it will be when we come back.
Okay, so was there an approach to disinfecting fabrics and costumes?
After, I mean, beforehand, you know, everything was new or clean and packaged, like I said, in mask and glove. When it was quarantined in the house, we gave it 2 weeks. When it came to me, I was masked and gloved and carefully removed all the pieces and parts, immediately laundered all launderable items. The dry cleanables just got hung on a rack for another 2 weeks. So I sprayed, you know, I sprayed alcohol on the clothes, but the dry cleaning, it was just the dry cleaning, and it just hung. I also did Lysol for shoes and things that could hold up to the Lysol sanitation, but that was the practice. The quarantine was the biggest practice.
There was a question of, were the actors local?
Local in a 25-mile radius, yes. Yes.
They were in county.
Yes.
Did the actors use their roommates or significant others to help with fittings?
They used their roommates and significant others to help with filming, not so much with fittings. Just there was one exception to that, where there was a couple that actually was quarantined together, so they helped each other out. But otherwise, they used for filming, but they dressed themselves and then they turned their camera back on, and that was it. It was really if they could. Actually, one of the students had to use his mom. He was going to have to go use his mom to help him with his pants, but that was it. But it is a good idea if you have a quarantine buddy that you can get help with that. I'm curious about measurements as we start doing measurements, and the actors have to do them themselves in the fall.
Was your director involved in your remote fittings on Zoom, and did you get feedback on the costumes from them?
It's a good question. He was not involved in the fittings, but after we had some of the fittings, they would wear some of the wackier costumes. They'd throw on the pieces in the stage, like the final staging rehearsal. So it was a pseudo dress rehearsal. And we had to do some movement stuff with some of the pieces. So that's when the director saw or gave feedback to some of the fitting things we did over Zoom. Brent is pretty easygoing. He's very excited about anything you show him. So he was clear on the design, and he is not a micromanager in that way. So he wasn't present all the time.
He's excellent to collaborate with.
He is. No one else can have him. I'm keeping him as my collaborator forever.
And we're almost at 1:40, but the last question was, and I don't know if you answered this already, is are you working in the costume shop or in the shop?
I'm working in the costume shop a couple days a week. I was in there this week because our costume class has prepared kits of supplies that we just delivered to all of our students for the costume technology class. So that's what I was doing. Probably 1 or 2 times a week. The campus has a pretty strict policy to get back into the classroom. So not all the time, not full time. I will be working a lot from my home studio. And that was everything. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Now I will turn it over.
Only because of the problems that you're having right now to do fittings and develop the collections or the costumes that you need for the performance, I was thinking in terms of using a minimalistic approach to the costumes, in the sense of keeping it to the bare minimum, as you said in the beginning, and like you said, reducing, being environmentally friendly with what you have. That reminded me of a Shakespeare play I saw in London when I was living there. And I think it was called the 37 Shakespeare's plays in 97 minutes or something like that. It was a comedy that portrayed all of his work in just a short period of time. And they used basic props, regular clothing, nothing that portrayed any of the
Full period.
Nothing that represented what Shakespeare wrote, but
Yeah.
with a mop and a bucket and a little wooden step bench that they used, they portrayed the whole thing in such a way that there was no need for costumes. They just moved them up from one head to another to represent either a female or a male character, and the play was basically based on performance, on that capacity they had to perform and to take in the character. And I was thinking, okay, maybe that can be a solution for your costuming problems until you can go back to your new or old normal, in the sense of, okay, fitting problems. You will have fitting problems all the time.
Yes.
Because,
so let me stop you there, Magda. I think that that's a wonderful point. Totally on par with that idea of minimalism, of going back to what we have that we can work with. The performer's ability is definitely one of the main skills we have that we can work with to help do a more minimal production. I think that's great. And your comment about safety practices in fashion and applying them to costume, I think once you hear Susan's paper, that might be another time to put in any other comments about cross-pollinating our safety practices, right? So I'm gonna stop you there for now, but if you have any other further comments or questions, please feel free. And if for any reason there's that Shakespeare show, if it wasn't too long ago and there's a digital link, that would be a wonderful thing to share with us in the chat. If you can find that. I'm
looking for it right now.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead and put it in the chat. I'm gonna put you back on mute, Magda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now without further ado, I am honored to have Susan Su and Teresa Chow here to present their extensive work that they have been refining up to the minute for us to have the latest practices, and that they will continue to update. It's my pleasure to introduce them both to you. Please feel free to take it away, Susan and Teresa. Thank you.
Okay, so I can't see Teresa now, but I'm just going to say unmute yourself. And I have a little brief introduction of the two of us to all of you. I see the names of a lot of wonderful friends from long ago and a lot of new people as well. So thank you for having us. When we met, Teresa was 7 years old in 3rd grade, and I was 6 in 2nd grade here in Pittsburgh. I was about to have my tonsils removed, and it was so long ago that they gave me ether to put me out. We were both the first Chinese Americans in our school districts. Teresa was later a biology major at Carnegie Mellon University, and I was a theater dramat who had the amazing experience of being given Godspell as my first show in the concrete bunker known as the Studio Theater. So the production in the Berkshires right now is Godspell. And one of the great, wonderful things about their production is that the world around them is in turmoil and grieving, and in a kind of terrible shape. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, it was the Vietnam War, and there was a generation gap. None of us were getting along with anybody older than 30. And there was a kind of urgency to the sweet message that Godspell brought. So I'm really tickled that everybody has worked so hard with Actors Equity and everybody else out there in the Berkshires. Teresa got her master's in public health and master's in nursing and worked for 2 years in a clinical microbiology laboratory. She has been an infection preventionist since 1975, and she works primarily in acute care hospitals and clinics with additional experience in long-term care facilities. She's a fellow in the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology, and one of the most patient, lovely, wonderful friends a girl could ask for. So in terms of me, I like to tell my students that I started at the top with Godspell, and I've been working my way down ever since. My career has been mostly in this country's regional theaters, and lately I have been thrilled to have curated some international costume exhibitions, such as Costume at the Turn of the Century, 1990 to 2015, and Innovative Costume of the 21st Century, The Next Generation. Both of these shows were enormous exhibitions of costume design that premiered at the Bakrushin Theater Museum in Moscow and toured the world afterwards. So here we are, and as COVID hit us, I can't even remember the first phone call that we had, but I started asking Teresa questions, and pretty soon the questions turned into me writing everything down. And the more I furiously wrote, the more I began to think this could be maybe helpful for our industry. So I hope it's helpful to you. Teresa and I don't have a lovely slideshow like Colleen does because we've been writing up until the very last minute. So you'll have to make do with our faces. But I'm going to start by saying this. There is going to be a lot in this presentation. And we're going to go through it pretty quickly, but you will each have the new edition of it. There's an old one out that people probably have already. This is up to date as of today. And there is a table of contents and a related document of guidelines for the industry that can go with it as well. So there's so much that we have to do and think about in terms of the invisible tiny killer that can hang in the air and we can't see it. And the thing that I am always very, very aware of is how hard we all work. We all try to pull off miracles on a daily basis. We never have enough time. We never have enough money. We never have enough hands with us. And yet we do our best to do everything. So when we talk about some of the really urgent safety measures that are going to be necessary, I'm very well aware that we get to the end of the day and we're all pretty tired. And our end of the day is not everybody else's end of the day. It's usually us still in the costume shop long after, our scene shops have gone home, long after the other faculty members have gone. So we will give you what we have come up with and hope that we can talk through some of what can be realistic for everybody before we end our session. So the health and safety of everybody is the most important thing. And the most important thing for us to also let you know is that the recommendations are based on scientific research and that we know that the primary source of infection is from person to person via droplets containing the virus when an individual speaks, shouts, sings, coughs, or sneezes. So the primary methods of spreading COVID-19 include ensuring, number one, good ventilation in the fitting rooms and workspace. And Teresa's going to talk about that in a little bit. We, the costume people, don't always have the ability to have any control over that, but we have excellent information that you can give to your building managers to do their job. It is also essential to have a written plan to prevent the spread of COVID-19. It is the job of your employer to write it down and to have this be something that everybody can read. Also, you know, what we call the 3 W's, the wearing of masks, what's the W in social distancing? I forgot. Maybe it's the holding off of and being wary of being too close. And then there is the washing of the hands. We all know this. And while the inanimate environment is not the primary source of COVID, there have been reports and as many as 100 doctors who have written to the CDC to say that tests have been done and that the COVID virus can hang in the air for a great long time. The number 16 holds in my mind in terms of it can be there for 16 hours, okay? So every company with a costume design department should have the plan that meets the federal, state, and local guidelines. And this is something that Teresa and I have tried to abide by. And certainly we know that the picture is changing all the time and that our state and local government is going to respond differently as more information comes up. All right. I wanted to put in here some of what the IA, the International Alliance of Theater Stage Employees, has outlined in terms of the requirements. And they're bullet pointed in the document for you. I think these are all really, really good ones. And I also want to say, before I go through this whole list, that it's really important that your plan that your employer comes up with includes enforcement. This has been a big question at my university at Carnegie Mellon. You know, the teachers and the staff all want to know, well, who's responsible for enforcement? You know, how do we do this? OSHA believes that if you do not have enforcement, you do not have a safety plan. So quickly through the bullet points, a written COVID safety plan, notification of and liaison with the local public health authorities, one or more autonomous compliance officers, somebody who has specialized training, who has the responsibility and authority for COVID-19 safety compliance and enforcement. And this is kind of a tricky one because I think it's possible that at CMU we only have one person for the whole university. I'm not positive, but maybe Tia can tell me later. You need to know that your systems will be employed to access health of all the personnel prior to entry into the workplace. So having some kind of app or a way of knowing that the screening is going to happen before they step foot in. And the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health has a hierarchy of control that will guide approaches to mitigating risk. So the NIOSH site is something that we cite in our paper and that you can look at. All the required PPE, that is the personal protective equipment, should be provided and maintained by the employer. Effective communication and training needs to happen as well. We all have been making masks, so I'm sure that we all feel like we know everything there is to know. Actually, there's more. There's even more. So training is important, and the support programs. There was an IA presentation that talked about the mental health of everybody going from being isolated to being back together again, and the stress of both those kinds of actions. There should be assurance of paid leave and income retention if a person gets sick or exposed. And obviously also compliance with the American with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination in Employment, and also the Canadian Human Rights Act when implementing the mitigation strategies and measures. And then there needs to be continual assessment and adjustment of venues based on the changing circumstances. So now Teresa is going to walk you fairly quickly through the ventilation section of our paper, because we want to get to the fittings and the things that we all are used to doing in the shops. But Monona Russell has ventilation as her specialty, and she wrote a 2-page section of our paper. So take it away, Teresa.
Okay, the ventilation part is really important. It's probably something you don't think about because that's not what you deal with. You know, it's not your expertise. But if you are in a stagnant room, that's your enemy. You want fresh air. Fresh air is going to get rid of the virus, dilute the virus. If it stays around in stagnant air, it could be around for 16 hours, as Susie already mentioned. So it's pretty scary. You know, most of your productions are in older buildings. There are very few brand new buildings with super air conditioning and ventilation systems. Do they have any ventilation at all? You know, you can put a fan in there. What's that going to do? It's just going to throw the air around in the room. It doesn't get rid of it. You want something that exhausts outside, such as an air conditioner that you can connect and exhaust it outside. If it doesn't exhaust outside, it's just blowing cold air around. It's not helping you in any way. So you really want to make sure you have something. A HEPA filter, a portable HEPA filter might be helpful, but it only covers a very small space. So your best friend is going to be the maintenance and facilities people. Find out what you have and find out how it works. You know, some of the places say, oh, you should have 10 to 15 exchanges of air. Well, that's what we use in isolation rooms in the hospital. That's a lot of air, you know, and we have 15 exchanges of air in the operating room. And how many of that is fresh air? That's really important. In an airplane, it's just recirculated. It's not fresh air being brought in. So you need to ask those questions and work with your maintenance people to make sure you're going to be safe. I think the other thing about unused buildings is if the water hasn't been run for a while, the air conditioning system, or HVAC system as we call it, doesn't work for a while, they're going to have biofilm buildup in the cooling towers and in the pipes. So what grows in the biofilm? Legionella. Legionella causes Legionnaire's disease. People who are immunosuppressed are very susceptible. And of course, you know, when they had the initial Legionnaire outbreak in Philadelphia, the one thing was a lot of the men who got sick, they were smokers. So if we have people who are vaping and smoking and enjoying a little bit of meth as well as some of the weed that we have, you know, they're going to be susceptible to Legionnaire's disease. In addition, if the place smells a little musty, you know, you've got mold. So where does mold grow? Well, look up on the ceiling and see if there's stained ceiling tiles. That indicates there's a leak. You look and see if there are any puddles on the floors. You've got some wet drywall. Drywall is a great medium for growing mold. So you have to mitigate this before you reopen the place and make sure people aren't going to have asthma attacks or allergy attacks because there's so much mold in there. I think the other thing is, as I talked to Susie, my background is acute care, healthcare, and I don't know anything about the costume industry. I've had such a pleasure learning about it and working with Susie and reconnecting with her after all these years. But, you know, I understand a lot of your workspaces are like closets. Closets are not acceptable. you need to have it be well ventilated. You need to be able to have
Teresa, you froze.
at least 6 feet separate. Oh, so what should I do?
Just say what you said right after closets are not acceptable,
Oh, okay.
which we all agree.
Yeah, I saw Colleen nodding her head there. But we're asking that you have enough space for social separation, i.e. 6 feet to 16 feet. And that's going to be a hard ask in creating a new space. You know, can you do that? I don't know. So basically, you're going to have to work around it. My recommendation is just have one person work with the actor. That's not always possible, but try. And if you have to do face-to-face contact, you want to wear the personal protective equipment, which we'll talk about a little more later. And that consists of masks, gowns, gloves, as Colleen, and protective eyewear that Colleen did talk about in her presentation. I think the most important thing is that you just be careful. You've got to be on the defensive. So if anybody comes in a little bit off, you know, you don't want to work with them. And that's really important. One of the things that we have to do, or the company has to do, your boss employer has to do, is set up some sort of testing program. What kind of testing program you have, you need to talk with your health department and other experts in the field to see what's best. You know, the gold standard is testing for nucleic acid, but that test is in short supply and it's been taking a long time to get results. You want results within 72 hours. Why? Well, because if you get tested on day 0, but your results don't come back until day 14 after the test, what's happened in between? If the test is positive, you've got that person spreading the infection all over the place. If the test is negative, you don't know what's happened in the 14 days that has lapsed. So they could be positive in that time. The other thing is, depending on the type of test that you use, there's some tests that are quick tests, you get a turnaround time in a few hours, but the positive test result is very good, it's very accurate. The negative test has a 15 to 20% false negative. So, you know, you do want the test to be the best test you can get access to, plus the most reliability as well as fast results. I think that testing is really hard. It's really in high demand. This week, the University of Illinois came out with a saliva test that gave out results within a few hours. And we'll see if it gets approved for nationwide, worldwide use. Right now, they're using it extensively in Urbana, where the university is located, and they're testing their students very, very frequently. So you haven't heard of outbreaks at Urbana, which is really great. However, since you can't be tested every day, like some of the sports teams are being done, what are you going to do? Well, you want to screen everyone on a daily basis for any signs or symptoms of infection. You want to ask the questions that we listed. You know, do you have fever? Do you have respiratory symptoms? Do you have body aches? On and on and on. Have you recently lost your sense of taste or smell? That's a really great one. But even GI symptoms and muscle aches have been indicators of infection. I think the other thing that's really important, Susie's been telling me some stories about how actors come in and they're not the cleanest people around. You know, we have to put the responsibility on everybody involved. Whoever comes into your workplace, must be clean. They must be healthy, and they are responsible for reporting if they're not feeling well, if they've been exposed to COVID, and if they're supposed to be quarantined because they're positive for COVID. So these are things that we really have to re-emphasize to the students as well as to your colleagues. You know, one of the things in healthcare, because the nurses get punished and other workers get punished if they take too many days off, you know, they come in and they're sick and they just take some Tylenol, some aspirin, and they are able to work. but they're in the meantime highly infectious. So how can we all be more responsible in this day and age of COVID? That's something you can emphasize and emphasize and emphasize, and people still won't do it. So it can be really frustrating. I think the biggest thing, if somebody is sick, they need to stay home, and don't go to big parties. It's something that we have had a nationwide problem with. So in addition to meticulous hand hygiene, social distancing, the wearing of the PPE, which we'll talk about a little more. Susie?
Okay, so if you're following along, I'm on page 8. So we all know about masks, gloves, and gowns, and probably the most important thing in this section is for you to, even if you think you know it all, please view the donning and doffing videos of how you take on and off your mask and how you treat it along the way. One of the things that became evident to me in talking to Teresa is that when we are face to face with an actor, our hands all over them and their hands possibly, close to us, that it really would be a good idea for us to go ahead and have our costume shops make some gowns, like hospital gowns that close in the back and tie at the neck and in the middle, and that we use a new gown per person. Because the whole thing is, asymptomatic people can carry the virus. That means that somebody who doesn't know they're sick has no idea that they shouldn't be at a rehearsal singing or in the fitting, laughing with you in a small space, could have the virus and could spread it to you. So in the most careful of situations, Teresa is recommending that we have a gown per actor. Now, we all know that usually we have a whole slew of actors lined up and it's a heavy day and it's 1, 2, 3. And, for those of you who are in the movie industry, it's even more. But this is something that, in the best case scenario, it would be a new mask, new gloves, new gown per actor. The other thing that we have heard recently is that Dr. Fauci has said that, he feels if we are in close contact with people for a longer period of time than, 15 minutes, which we are in fittings, he said that it wouldn't hurt to have, face shields over our masks as well. The eye protection is something that it's not mandatory by the CDC, but if it makes you feel more comfortable, it might not be a bad idea. The virus travels and it goes into the mucosa. So our nose, our mouth, and our eyes all have mucosa in them. So it's possible for them to travel in that way. I'm going to kind of go quickly because we're already at 5:10. The one careful thing in terms of the PPE that I want to make you aware of is that there are some hand sanitizers that have not been approved that have methanol in them. This is methyl alcohol or wood alcohol. It can be toxic and absorbed through the skin, and it can be fatal if ingested. There actually have been some people who have died from drinking it. And guess where they got that idea from? Okay, so there are 3 different kinds of masks, and I'm not going to go through the cloth and paper masks so much as I would like Teresa to talk about the N95s. There's information here in terms of cleaning your masks. Probably the biggest takeaway that I want to give to you there, because I know all of you have looked at all the various different recommendations and have read that, you know, chiffon can create an electrostatic charge, and that electrostatic charge is a good thing. So 2 layers of chiffon on the inside, poly chiffon, can help. And the 3-layered mask is the best. We are also all making masks that have pockets for filters. The main thing is this: if you are outside sweating into your mask, or if it's been a long, long day and you've been talking all day and your mask is damp, change it out, because a wet mask is a compromised mask, and will allow the virus to penetrate through it. So I think I'm going to actually ask Teresa now to talk about N95 particulate respirators. They are around. I mean, you know, you can get them at Home Depot and Lowe's. And take it away, Teresa. We're now on page 10.
Just a couple of things. If you're wearing a bandana, that isn't recommended. You know, even though a lot of people do it, it doesn't have the 3 layers like you have in your masks that you're making, as well as it just is very, very porous. So, you know, if people are coming in with bandanas, I know I went to get my hair cut and my guy was wearing a bandana. I'm like, ugh. So I put on my mask and just held it at my face, even though it wasn't around my ears. But the N95 has, the other masks don't form a tight seal around your face. That's why they don't give you 100% protection, whereas the N95 does make a very tight seal around your face. If you have to wear this mask for a long time, it gets pretty uncomfortable and it makes you breathe a lot harder. That's why OSHA requires you have a medical evaluation, you have a fit testing program, you have an education program, and this is annual. And having gone through this every year during my work experience, it's a pain in the butt. You know, you've got to set aside half an hour of your day just to go through all this to get renewed so you can wear the mask. So if anyone is wearing that, the employer has to have this program. And as a result of the mask being in short supply and high demand, OSHA's mandates are being ignored. However, let me warn you, do not make OSHA mad. That's not something you want OSHA to be coming in to look at to see how you're doing. Implement these programs that OSHA requires as soon as possible. And of course, you know, if you have people wearing these masks, you've got to do this fit testing and medical evaluation every year. And you have to document all the education as well as the fit testing and medical evaluation. The other thing that is really, really prominent now is people are trying to reuse the mask, so they're trying to disinfect it. There are all sorts of things people are trying. Don't do those methods if it's not approved by CDC, okay? Because you could destroy the efficacy of the mask and you destroy the fit testing of the mask. The best thing that you can do is to have enough masks, if you're wearing them every day, and to take them off at the end of the day, put them into a clean paper bag, let it sit there for 5 to 7 days. So if you're wearing a mask every day, you probably need about 5 or 7 masks.
And label the
But
bag
this,
with a date.
yeah, and label bag 1, 2, 3, 4, or by date, whatever. I think 1, 2, 3, 4 is the easiest, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That makes it very, very easy to track which ones are the next ones that you're going to be wearing. And just leave it there. Now, last week, an article came out that public researchers found out that they just went out and bought a Farberware pressure cooker. They call it an electric cooker, and they disinfected 4 or 5 masks in one of them. Now, this method has gained worldwide attention, but know that it's not yet been vetted. So you can try it, but you know, we're still looking to see if that's an appropriate method. And they worked with 3M with their respirators to make sure it was good. The basis of my profession is hand hygiene. You can't wash your hands enough. You can't not use sanitizers or just plain soap and water. as Susie mentioned, if you're using a hand sanitizer, it should be 60 to 95% ethyl alcohol. Methanol or 1-propanol are two products that go into some of these hand hygiene products that will cause you harm. So make sure you look at, you know, if you buy a known hand hygiene product like Purell, you know it's safely made and it's okay to use. But if you get some off-the-counter thing that's new, you want to look at the contents. And if there aren't contents in it, don't buy it. I think it's really, now if you're using soap and water, wash your hands for 20 seconds at least. And if you count the 20 seconds, you can sing happy birthday 2 times.
So,
you know, Susie,
yeah,
straight, wash your hands. The back of your and your thumbs and under your nails. One of the things I found as a nurse is that the hand sanitizers irritated me if I didn't get them out between my fingers. I would develop little rashes. So be careful, make sure you do that. Now, while your hands are clean, they're clean, and you have to sit in a prayer position to keep them clean, but that's not possible. The minute you touch something, your hands are contaminated, they're dirty. What do? I mean, during this whole presentation, I've touched my face 1,000,000 times. The thing that drives me crazy is people wear the mask and they keep pushing it up to their nose. Find a mask that stays on your nose, because if you keep pushing it up, more than likely you're contaminating it. The other thing is, what about, you know, your hair? Everyone has long hair. As I see Susie with her hair down, you know, because the last few times we've done Zoom, she's always had it up. Your hair is going to get in the way. I remember taking care of a patient, and that's when I was young and had really long hair. He looked at me, he goes, "You're tickling me with your hair." You know, I didn't have it pulled back. I didn't have it up. And that's something you need to think about as you work with the actors and your colleagues, remind your colleagues. The other thing is gloves can help protect you from getting your hands contaminated, but realize gloves have microscopic holes and the virus can go in between. Either you give it to the patient, the actor or whoever you're working with, or you can acquire it through the gloves. So the minute you take off your gloves, you need to wash your hands. And 100% of the time when you remove your gloves, you usually contaminate your hands. So that's so important. Face shields are great because they minimize the number of times you touch your face, your mask, pushing it up, touching your hair. So I have nothing against face shields, but you have to remember to clean them off too after each use. Susie, do you want to talk more about some of the other stuff? Or
yes, I'm going to go into the fitting room now because there are a few really, really important things that I want to pass on. Probably the biggest thing that Manana said recently that wasn't in our first document is that it is very, very difficult to clean a carpet to the degree that it would need to be cleaned. And you all know from vacuuming how dust can come up into the air and make it sort of grody for a while. So the recommendation is that we remove the carpets in our fitting rooms and that we mop them every night. And there are, we have talked about the distancing, the separation of 16 feet between people is better than 6 feet with the information that we have about aerosols. I know that's not possible for everybody. But there's also taking care with the number of staff that are in the fitting. And there is another important thing that Teresa notified me about, which is the maintaining of records so that we can have a part in the COVID contact tracing. Teresa, would you talk about that for a minute?
Sure. Contact tracing is really important because you want to prevent people from getting sick and possibly dying from COVID. What they do is if they have a case, they will try to identify every person who had contact or close proximity to the person who is positive. In order to do that, you've got to document who came in to your place, who worked with that person, and also if they are fitting and sharing some clothing, which clothing did they have? So contact tracing is a pain in the neck. It's time consuming, but so is record keeping. And people aren't going to want to do it. I think that, you know, if you can develop a method, a grid of a spreadsheet of some sort, that makes it easier. And then you can just write on it every day, or if you have a computer, log into it every day onto the spreadsheet. But you can't beat the contact tracing on preventing cases.
Thank you, Teresa. So when your actor comes in, you want them to be putting their clothes and their stuff into a washable bin of some sort, something that you can clean afterwards, and you probably need to have a different one for each actor who comes in for the fitting. Then it's also going to be important for you to clean down the fitting area between actors and use a disinfectant, which is EPA, you know, recommended. The other thing that you're doing is that you are doffing all of the PPE that you have had on in between.
Susan, sorry to interrupt. I'm going to
Yes.
give you a 1 minute warning of a wrap up so that we can ask questions of you.
Okay, and you know, I was going to say also that we can also take some of those questions and write them replies as well. So a really good idea is also when you're looking at your rack and your clothes to have a tag on it that keeps the journey of that particular piece and the time and date it was fit. I think that a lot of times we take certain garments and they're fit onto a variety of different actors in the show. So give yourself a tag there so that you know when the last time it was fit on somebody is, and you can quarantine that costume on a separate rack in a different place. The other thing you will want to be doing is to bag your rack and the fitted clothes every night. The best bagging material is paper. The next best would be something like muslin that you can wash. And the temperature is going to be an important thing to be considering there. So I wonder if we should skip the dressing rooms and wardrobe, wig, and sound departments and move quickly on to equipment. So the cleaning of the equipment is really, really tricky. And a lot of people have been trying to figure out ways that it's not such an onerous task. But sadly, we have gotten some really strong negative remarks from industrial hygienists and others that some of the UV light and ionized air situations have not been tested as carefully as they need to be. There are some that go into the HVAC, and there is more information in our document under ventilation and also in the end of our document. So before we leave everybody, I think, Teresa, would you talk about the devices?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really, really important is to know the difference between just disinfecting and cleaning. Everything has to be cleaned first, i.e., you know, your hands are dirty. You don't just put hand lotion on them automatically before you wash them. You wash them first. Cleaning is the act of scrubbing and using elbow grease to clean. Disinfectant is used after the cleaning to kill whatever residual microorganisms might be there. Now, just for example, I'm going to show and tell. You can have all sorts of different types of cleaning agents and disinfectants. I have here a wonderful product from Williams-Sonoma that I love. It says it's a top cleaner. I'm like, really? I look at it, there's no disinfectant quality in it whatsoever. A disinfectant is EPA registered and approved. Okay, so then I went to Home Depot and I'm looking for, you know, Lysol, Clorox, some of the ones that are on the list of EPA lists that are effective against COVID. COVID's not a very hard virus to kill. I couldn't find anything that I knew that was effective against COVID. This is EPA approved. So not everything that is EPA approved is effective against COVID. Then we go to disinfectants that are available in the hospital setting. And this disinfectant is really harsh. It's much harsher than what you get over the counter at Home Depot. And this is another little packet of bleach that they use in a hospital setting. It says on here, what is the contact time? 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, 10 minutes. You need to follow the instructions on these products. You also need to wear some personal protective equipment, especially gloves, when you're using these products, because they're all really toxic. They shouldn't be injected or ingested, as has been suggested. These products are highly effective, but they have to be used properly. I think the other thing is UV light has been highly recommended as something to use. Well, again, UV light enhances the killing of microorganisms after cleaning and disinfection. Not only that, this product is, it's like a robot. It goes around the hospitals and we use it after we clean and disinfected the rooms to kill really, really harsh organisms, such as drug-resistant organisms and what we call C. difficile spores. So spores are the hardiest, you know, they're like a capsule around the microorganism and they prevent it from getting killed. If you can kill the spores, you're doing a super job on cleaning. And some of these products are effective against the C. difficile spore. And so therefore, it's going to be effective against COVID. There's no reason that virus is going to survive it. But this robot that goes around that produces UV is very expensive. It must be used according to recommendations. You must have an education program to use it because the UV rays can cause sunburn, it can destroy your eyes, and you know, it can be a carcinogen. So be very careful what you pick to use. Make sure that the manufacturer has documented that it's effective against COVID. Ask for science that shows that it's effective against COVID. Make
Teresa,
sure.
can I stop you there for a sec?
Yes.
Can I stop you there? Sorry to interrupt your flow. Obviously, everyone, Susan and Teresa have done so much work and there's so much information to gather, but I wanted to stop before we were right at the end of the time that we told everyone we would be working. I guess first I'd like to ask Susan and Teresa, are you willing to chat and answer questions for another 10 minutes? Are you amenable to that? That's great. And then anybody,
Absolutely.
Susan, are you free? Are you okay?
Yes, absolutely. And if we don't get to everybody or you have to leave, we're happy to write something out and send it to you so that you can have a very complete response.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm willing to be emailed questions and forward them to everybody to be answered if that's the easiest way. So if it's okay with you all, I'm just, I had some prepared questions, but I'd like to just ask the first one of those so that we can get to the other questions of the registrants. My first question is, when do you think we won't need to do this safety practice any longer? What are the actual numbers or statistics we're looking for? Since a lot of us in education, we can't rely on our institutions to provide us that information. So what are we looking for when we can stop doing these practices?
I'm going to leave that to Teresa.
Thanks. I'll take a stab at it. Never.
Yeah, I know it's,
I
yeah.
think that, you know, as long as the rates are still going up and the virus is around, it's not going to disappear magically. It's going to be a lot of hard work. And maybe by the time we have a vaccine, we'll see the rates go down. But I don't think these practices are bad to continue, even if the virus isn't around.
Teresa, there have been a few questions about sweat, and you and I have talked about the parts of human emissions that carry the virus and those that don't. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I was amused when I saw that sweat was on the list of places where the virus was found, and it's not true. It brought me back to the memory of when HIV was first identified and how we couldn't touch those poor people who were HIV positive because we might get HIV from their sweat. There's no documentation that sweat carries COVID, the COVID virus. And I would like to put that, and I know what your actors do, they sweat a lot. That's just the name of the game, you know, and it's like for me, blood is the name of the game of my profession. It's the respiratory secretions, the blood, and the feces that have been found to carry the virus. There's been a lot of debate about urine. So far, urine has not been found to be infectious, and there's a lot of controversy as to whether that urine was contaminated by the feces or, you know, if the urine actually carries the virus. So it's just the blood, the feces, and respiratory secretions.
So pardon me for being really blunt, but how many of you have had actors who have come to a fitting with no underwear on, or maybe underwear that maybe isn't the freshest, you know? So we really do need to be very careful if we're asking them to take stuff off or, you know, needing to put stuff on. So I think we should all have rules that all actors should try to come to their fittings in the way that they would if they were going for an examination by a doctor or going for a massage. Please shower ahead of time. Please.
Oh, they don't do that for exams. I think if you have body wipes, not disinfectant wipes, be very, very careful. Get baby wipes. You can have them wipe themselves down.
Teresa, what about people's shoes?
I don't think shoes are a big issue.
But if the aerosols drop to the floor and we're walking all over the floors.
The floors and carpeting have not been a source of COVID. That's not been documented. And, you know, I think one of the suggestions is if you put floor planking over rugs, don't do that, because then when you wipe off the floor, it gets the rug wet and then you're going to grow mold. You know, remove the carpeting if it's there and you just don't like it. In the hospital, we have carpeting. We vacuum them every day and they're on a schedule for being shampooed. Now, initially, you know, there was carpeting in the birthing rooms, and that was really crazy because that got really messy and didn't get cleaned properly. So you don't put it in places where there's a lot of blood and secretions. But on the other hand, there is carpeting in a hospital, and it's not something you can't have. You just have to take care of it. If it becomes grody, I said to Susie, how many times is Mother Susie cleaning the floors and the equipment and the bathrooms? Right. You know, that's the other big place we didn't talk about, but we put into the paper. Oh my gosh, you know, the bathrooms, if they're gross, you got a problem. Clean the bathrooms or have somebody clean the bathrooms.
Right. Teresa, most of us have been doing things like quarantining our mail, washing our vegetables before we put them away. How long should a costume be quarantined? Well, first of all, I'm going to say this. Monona said, you people are crazy to try and do this at this time. If it were me, I would not do it. I mean, she, you know, how she would scare the shit out of you. Not do costumes, you know, I mean, not reopen. And I don't, you know how she can be, but I know you don't agree, but here's the thing that I want to ask. How long would you quarantine a costume that you couldn't wash? Monona would say, as soon as something's been washed, whether you're going to use it in the show or not, or whether you're going to put it back on the rack, wash it first. But what about everything that we dry clean that we cannot? And dry cleaning has not been vetted. There's no data that tells us anything about whether it's effective in killing the virus. So how long does something get quarantined when it's close?
I think the thing that's important is that you clean things. You know, there's no vetting of dryers being effective, but common sense tells us if you've washed it and then you dry it, it's clean. The virus is not a super virus. There are a lot of microorganisms that live through washers and dryers. You know, coronavirus is not super virus. It's pretty delicate. It's pretty easy to kill. I think it's going to kill it, and I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble because it's not vetted by saying that, but by quarantining it too, it has time to die. I was shocked, Elaine, when you said that you quarantined stuff for a month. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, what have you needed? You know,
That was when they were saying it was 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was 2 weeks with your actor and then 2 weeks with you. That was a whole month. I'm like, oh, wow, that was admirable. I give you a lot of credit. But if you can't do it, I think, you know, a week is probably, 72 hours is probably enough for the virus to die. It depends on the situation. Are you in a very moist environment where things don't dry? If that's the case, it might take a little longer. You know, are you in a very dry atmosphere like Death Valley? Yeah, it might die a lot quicker. I don't know what the humidity is. I don't know if anybody knows what the humidity is that the virus will die. We know that it lives in warm weather with 60, 70% humidity. You know, we know it lives in colder weather with 40 or 50% humidity. So I don't know. We don't know the answers.
So the
If you
other
want to
thing,
take a stab at it, 72 hours.
there's
Try it.
another important thing that I want to ask you because lots of people have been wondering about the dryers that we have and if they can reach a kill temperature. We also have something, Teresa, that are called wig dryers, you know, where we will put several wigs that are set in rollers to dry more quickly. It's a box, you know, with a temperature gauge. So what about a dryer? Tumbling in a dryer.
Okay, I'm going to answer you with the kill temperature of SARS-CoV is COVID-1, not the COVID that was outbreak in 2003, 2004. That is killed at 100, oh my gosh, what was the temperature, Susie, for 50 minutes? It was 56 degrees C for 50 minutes. That, since SARS-CoV-2 follows the same pattern as SARS-CoV, it probably will die around the same time. Now, I have a dryer at home. Do I know how hot it gets? I have no idea. Can you measure it? I don't know how to do it. You know, in a commercial setting where you have an official laundromat for stuff from hospitals, they have certain temperatures that they're supposed to reach.
Can you shove a meat thermometer into something and throw it in?
I don't know that a meat thermometer will work in a dryer, Susie. You're
I know. I'm just
yeah, you're playing devil's advocate. Yeah, so I don't know how hot your dryer gets. Okay, if you can achieve 56 degrees C for 50 minutes, that will probably kill whatever it is. And I think that's what the pressure cooker did. They actually went up to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's even hotter than 56 degrees C. I don't know. I'm trying to think what the conversion of 56 degrees C is. I don't know off the top of my head. It's in our paper. But, you know, how do you know that stuff? And as far as UV light goes, are people using UVA and UVB lights? If they are, oh my gosh. I can't imagine the harm you're causing. Okay, so that's why if the system of disinfecting or killing the virus has not been vetted, don't use it because you don't know what you're doing. And that scares me. It's like going into the blind.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you there, Teresa. I think that's a really good note to end on. I'm sorry that there isn't more time for questions, but again, I've put my email address in the chat and it's available on the event information. You can feel free to send me any questions that weren't answered and I will forward them to Teresa and Susan for answering. I would also recommend that you, if you haven't already, please do read all the way through those documents that Susan and Teresa have provided. They are extremely detailed and provide a lot more information even than we've touched on today. But for now, I think we're gonna close our session. Abra, do you wanna take us out for today? I wanna thank Susan and Teresa so much for being here with us.
Yes, thank you guys so much. This was really fascinating. I'm so sad that we need this information, but it's critical. And I would like to thank Susan, Teresa, Colleen. Thank you so much for valuable and interesting presentation. And we just have to keep going forward somehow and maintain our creative levels, to maintain our sanity. If we can't create, we go crazy. Thank you so much for everybody for participating. A video of this event with subtitles will be posted on the CSA's YouTube channel soon. You can save a transcript of the chat today if you'd like. I highly recommend doing that because it has the links that will still be valuable after we're done with this talk. So where in the little chat box where you put a message, there's 3 little dots. If you click on that, you can, the little file picture, you can download a copy of the chats right there, okay? Save chat. If you enjoyed today's programming, think about becoming a member of CSA if you're not already. Katie put a link in the chat to join. Then also, if you're on the West Coast, the Western Region is offering a subsidy for people affected financially by COVID-19. And there's also a link in the chat for that. We're offering student rates to those of you that might be affected via your employment. In October, our next event will be our virtual symposium, Technology and the New Bespoke, Craft and Craftspersons Adapting Over Time. And we are adapting that over time because originally that was going to be face-to-face because we plan these things a year out, and now we will be doing it virtually. So thank you for being our guinea pig this time, everybody. For November, we will be having an event with Leon Weavers and Elise Rousseau on the vestments that were part of a Costume Society of America Angels project. And they will be talking about the grant process and what they discovered about those garments. And that's all I have to say, folks. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. It was very informative. These documents, Susan and Teresa, are going to be fabulous for those of us moving back into the workroom sooner than later. And anyway, thank you. I really appreciate everybody's efforts. Thank you very much.